A warning to our viewers. What you're about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Hello everyone, I'm Brittany Bailey. It is one of the most shocking and horrifying murder cases to ever happen in East Tennessee, one that took two young lives full of promise and put their families through 8 criminal trials. The tragic murders shocked the community and the families of these 2 young victims. We do have a warning. The details of this case may not be suitable for some of you. According to the investigation, Chris Newsom was raped an hour or 2 before his death. In his final moments, he was marched barefoot to a nearby railroad track. He was shot 3 times in the neck, back, and head. The killers had stuffed a sock in his mouth, tied his wrists and ankles, and covered his head with a sweatshirt tied around his neck with shoestrings.
January 7th, 2007. Knoxville, Tennessee. A railroad worker is making his morning rounds on the tracks behind Chipman Street. It's cold, quiet, just another Sunday in a city that was about to wake up to its worst nightmare. Then he sees it. A body burned beyond recognition, wrapped in a comforter like a grotesque gift. Hands bound behind the back with shoelaces. This was Christopher Newsom, 23 years old. He's been shot 3 times. Raped, set on fire while still alive. But Chris isn't the only victim. 3 miles away, inside a rental house on Chipman Street, something even worse is happening. A young woman is dying, slowly, deliberately. She's been tortured for hours, bleach poured down her throat, her body beaten and broken. Now she's been stuffed into a kitchen garbage can, wrapped in trash bags, suffocating inch by inch in absolute darkness. Her name is Channon Christian. She's 21, a college senior with everything to live for. 12 hours earlier, she and Chris were just another young couple in love. They had plans: dinner, movies, a friend's party. Normal Saturday night stuff. Instead, they were carjacked by 5 predators who saw them as nothing more than playthings. What followed was a 48-hour nightmare of torture, rape, and murder, so savage that it would take 12 years and 8 trials to bring their killers to justice. This is the horrifying truth behind one of America's most brutal crimes, and the 48 hours that shattered everything we thought we knew about human evil. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. But before we dive into the horrors of what happened, you need to know who Channon and Chris really were, because they weren't just victims. They were real people with dreams, ambitions, and futures that were stolen from them. Channon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Nacogdoches, Texas. When she was 12, her family packed up and moved to Tennessee, settling into the quiet suburbs of Knoxville. It was here that Channon would bloom into the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. At Farragut High School, she wasn't just popular, she was magnetic. Teachers remember her infectious smile lighting up classrooms. Friends described someone who could walk into any room and instantly make it brighter. She had this rare quality that drew people in, made them feel like they mattered. But Channon wasn't just a pretty face with a winning personality. She was brilliant, driven, she had a plan. By January 2007, she was weeks away from graduating from the University of Tennessee with a degree in sociology. Not because it was easy, but because she wanted to make a difference. Channon had plans to work with underserved communities, to help people who needed it most. She saw problems in the world and wanted to fix them. Her parents, Gary and Dina Christian, watched their daughter with pride and amazement. Here was this young woman who played golf, excelled in her studies, and still found time to care about everyone around her. She was their miracle. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Gary and Dina expected their daughter home by Sunday morning. They had no reason to worry. Channon always kept her word, always called when she said she would. Sunday morning came. The phone stayed silent. By Sunday afternoon, panic was setting in. This wasn't like Channon. Something was wrong. They had no idea that their daughter was already dead. Christopher Newsom was Knoxville through and through. Born on September 21, 1983, he was the kind of young man who embodied everything good about small-town America. At Halls High School, Chris was a baseball star, not because he was the biggest or the strongest, but because he had heart. His teammates remember a guy who played every game like it mattered, who lifted others up, who never let ego get in the way of teamwork. After high school, while other kids chased big dreams in distant cities, Chris stayed home. He enrolled at Pellissippi State Community College, learned a trade, became a carpenter. And he was damn good at it. If you drive through Knox County today, you'll still see Chris Newsom's handiwork. Crown molding in homes across the area, crafted by hands that would never hold a hammer again, each piece a testament to a young man who took pride in building things that would last. At 23, Chris was building more than just houses. He was building a life with Channon Christian. Friends say they were perfect together. She was the fire, he was the steady flame. She dreamed big. He made those dreams feel possible. Chris was the kind of guy who texted back right away, who showed up when he said he would, who never left people wondering where he was or if he was okay. On Saturday night, January 6th, his friends expected to see him at a party. They sent texts, left voicemails, called again and again. The messages went unanswered. The calls went straight to voicemail. By Sunday morning, Chris Newsom's phone had gone silent forever. Saturday, January 6th, 2007, started like any other weekend for Channon and Chris. They had plans. Simple plans. The kind millions of young couples make every Saturday night across America. Dinner, maybe catch a movie. Then head to a friend's party to hang out, laugh, be young and in love. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. Just another night in the life of two people who had no idea they were living their final hours. Channon spent the afternoon at her friend's apartment on Washington Pike in North Knoxville. She was getting ready the way she always did, taking her time, making sure everything was perfect. Friends remember her being in a great mood that day, excited about the evening ahead. Around 8 p.m., Chris pulled up in his truck to pick her up. Security cameras would later capture what happened next, though at the time no one was paying attention to the ordinary scene playing out in an ordinary apartment complex parking lot. Channon walked out to meet him. They embraced. A simple, sweet moment between two people who loved each other. The kind of moment that happens 1,000 times a day in parking lots across the world. But this time, someone was watching. From somewhere in the shadows of that parking lot, predators had spotted their prey. 5 killers who had been driving around that Saturday night, looking for victims, looking for someone to hurt, someone to destroy. Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom had just become perfect targets. What happened next took less than 5 minutes. At gunpoint, both were forced into the back of Channon's Toyota 4Runner. Their hands were tied behind their backs. Their normal Saturday night had just become a nightmare. The 4Runner pulled away from the apartment complex at approximately 9 p.m. Inside were 7 people now. Channon and Chris as terrified captives, and 5 killers who were already planning unspeakable horrors. Meanwhile, across town, friends were gathering for the party. They checked their phones. Where were Channon and Chris? This wasn't like them to be late without calling. They tried texting, no response. They called, straight to voicemail. By 10 p.m., friends were starting to worry. By 11 p.m., some drove back to the apartment complex where the couple had been last seen. They found Chris's truck, still parked where he'd left it, but Channon's 4Runner was gone. And so were Channon and Chris, 3 miles away, at a rental house on Chipman Street. The real horror was just beginning. What would happen over the next 48 hours would be so brutal, so methodical, that even seasoned homicide detectives would struggle to maintain their composure while describing it in court. To understand what happened to Channon and Chris, you need to know about the monsters who took them. And make no mistake, these were monsters wearing human faces. 2316 Chipman Street was a rental house in North Knoxville. From the outside, it looked ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of place you'd drive past without giving it a second thought. But inside, it was a breeding ground for violence. The house belonged to 25-year-old Lemaricus Davidson. Davidson wasn't just a criminal, he was a career predator. 5 months earlier, he'd been released from prison after serving 5 years for carjacking and aggravated robbery. Within months, he was back to his old ways, dealing drugs and planning violent crimes from his Chipman Street base. Davidson didn't work alone. His half-brother, Letalvis Cobbins, was 24 years old with his own history of robbery convictions. The brothers fed off each other's violence, each one pushing the other to new depths of depravity. Then there was George Thomas, 24, known on the streets as Detroit. Thomas had multiple felony convictions and a reputation for brutality that made even hardened criminals nervous. Eric Boyd, 34, was the oldest of the group, another career criminal with a string of violent offenses. 4 men who had spent their lives hurting innocent people now gathered together in one place like a pack of rabid animals. But the group had a 5th member, someone who would prove that evil doesn't discriminate by gender. Vanessa Coleman was 18 years old, Cobbins' girlfriend. To the outside world, she might have seemed like just another teenager, caught up with the wrong crowd, but what Coleman would do over the next 48 hours would prove she was every bit as monstrous as the men she ran with. On Saturday, January 6th, these 5 predators made a decision that would seal the fate of 2 innocent people. They were going to go hunting, looking for victims to rob, rape, and terrorize. They had no specific plan, no particular target in mind. They were just cruising the streets of Knoxville, waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity came at the Washington Pike apartment complex. Security cameras captured the final moments of their freedom. Channon emerges from her friend's apartment building, walking across the dimly lit parking lot toward Chris's truck. She's smiling, happy to see him. Chris gets out to greet her, and they share what witnesses would later describe as a tender embrace between 2 people clearly in love. For 30 seconds, maybe a minute, they stand there talking, making plans, deciding whether to take his truck or her 4Runner to their next destination. They choose the 4Runner. Neither of them notices the car that's been slowly circling the parking lot. Neither sees the faces pressed against the windows, watching their every move. Calculating. Planning. To Channon and Chris, this is just another Saturday night, but to the killers stalking them, they've just become perfect victims. Davidson, Cobbins, and Boyd were in one car, slowly cruising through the complex. They spotted Channon's Toyota 4Runner. Nice vehicle. Worth stealing. Then they saw Channon and Chris. The decision was made in seconds. Guns were drawn. Within moments, both Channon and Chris found themselves staring down the barrels of loaded weapons, their normal Saturday night turning into a living nightmare. Get in the car. Simple words that changed everything. Hands were tied behind backs with shoelaces. Both victims were forced into the back seat of Channon's own vehicle. In less than 5 minutes, they had gone from a loving couple planning their evening to terrified captives in the hands of killers. The 4Runner pulled away from the apartment complex at approximately 9 p.m. The 3-mile drive to Chipman Street would be the longest journey of Channon and Chris's lives. Inside the vehicle, Davidson was behind the wheel. Cobbins sat beside him. Boyd controlled the 2 victims in the back seat, making sure they understood that any attempt to escape would result in immediate death. For Channon and Chris, those 3 miles must have felt like an eternity. They had no idea where they were being taken, no idea what these men planned to do with them, no idea that they would never see their families again. At 2316 Chipman Street, Thomas and Coleman were waiting. The house was ready. The stage was set for a crime so brutal that it would take 12 years and 8 trials before justice was finally served. But first came the most chilling moment of all, at 12:33 a.m. on January 7th. Channon's phone rang. Somehow, impossibly, she managed to call her parents. "I'll be back between 2 and 3 a.m., she told them, her voice steady, giving no hint of the terror that surrounded her. It was a lie forced upon her by her captors, a cruel deception designed to buy them time before anyone realized she and Chris were missing. It would be the last time Gary and Dina Christian ever heard their daughter's voice. What happened inside 2316 Chipman Street over the next several hours would become evidence in one of Tennessee's most horrific murder trials. The details, as revealed through forensic evidence and courtroom testimony, paint a picture of calculated cruelty that defies human comprehension. Christopher Newsom was immediately separated from Channon upon their arrival. His hands were bound behind his back with shoelaces. A sock was forced into his mouth to muffle any screams. His head was covered with a sweatshirt tied around his neck with more shoelaces, leaving him blind and gasping for air. According to the Knox County medical examiner's testimony, Chris was sexually assaulted inside Davidson's house. The forensic evidence revealed injuries consistent with rape using an object. This wasn't just murder. This was torture designed to inflict maximum suffering. But the killers weren't finished with Christopher Newsom. Sometime in the early morning hours of January 7th, Eric Boyd forced Chris to march barefoot from the house. Outside, the Tennessee winter was brutal. Temperatures had dropped below freezing. Chris, wearing only a shirt and underwear, was forced to walk nearly half a mile through the bitter cold to a set of railroad tracks behind the house. His bare feet left bloody prints in the frost. A mangled dog leash found along the route would later suggest it was used to control him during this final, torturous walk to his execution. At the railroad tracks, Christopher Newsom was shot 3 times. The first bullet hit his neck. He survived. The second struck his back, still alive. The third and final shot was fired with the gun's muzzle pressed against his head, just above his right ear. The bullet severed his brainstem instantly. Christopher Newsom was dead at 23 years old. But even death wasn't enough for these monsters. They wrapped Chris's body in a comforter, doused it with gasoline, and set him on fire. When railroad worker William Powell discovered the charred remains the next afternoon, January 7th, the body was so badly burned that identification required dental records. The DNA evidence that might have linked specific attackers to Chris's sexual assault had been destroyed by the flames. This wasn't an accident. It was part of the plan. While Christopher Newsom was being murdered at the railroad tracks, Channon Christian was beginning a nightmare that would last 2 more days. She was held captive primarily in the north bedroom of Davidson's house. According to prosecutors, Vanessa Coleman was assigned to guard her while the men carried out their killing spree. Coleman, barely 18 years old, would later claim she was just as much a victim as Channon. The evidence tells a different story. Forensic testimony revealed that Channon was repeatedly raped by multiple attackers over the course of her captivity. DNA evidence would later confirm that both Davidson and Cobbins sexually assaulted her. The medical examiner described her injuries as extreme and much more than a simple sexual assault, but the sexual violence was only part of her suffering. Channon was beaten repeatedly, kicked in the groin. Her head sustained severe trauma from blunt force injuries. Carpet burns covered much of her body, suggesting she was dragged across floors during the assaults. According to Davidson's own confession, at some point during her captivity, Channon looked at her attackers and said the words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "I don't want to die." Her plea for mercy fell on deaf ears. In the final hours of her life, Channon's attackers made a calculated decision to destroy DNA evidence. They poured bleach down her throat. They scrubbed her battered body with cleaning chemicals, paying particular attention to areas where they had left biological evidence. The bleach burned her mouth and throat. The chemical burns would be clearly visible during her autopsy. Then came the final horror. Still alive, still breathing, Channon was bound in what investigators called a hog-tied position, using curtains and strips of bedding. Her face was covered with a small plastic bag. Her body was stuffed into multiple large trash bags. She was placed inside a residential garbage can in Davidson's kitchen and covered with sheets. The medical examiner's testimony was clear. Channon Christian slowly suffocated to death in that garbage can. She was conscious. She knew what was happening to her. According to the timeline established at trial, Channon died sometime between the afternoon of January 7th and the afternoon of January 8th, at least 12 hours after Christopher had been murdered. While Channon was dying, Davidson was seen wearing Chris's shoes and using his cell phone. He gave Channon's personal belongings to his girlfriend as gifts. To him, Channon and Chris weren't human beings. They were just sources of entertainment and profit. Sunday morning, January 7th, 2007. Gary and Dina Christian are staring at their phones, waiting for a call that will never come. Channon had promised to be home between 2 and 3 a.m. It's now past 10 a.m., and there's been no word from their daughter. This isn't like Channon. She always keeps her promises. She always calls. Meanwhile, across town, Hugh and Mary Newsom are having the same terrifying realization. Their son, Chris, hasn't come home. His bed hasn't been slept in. His phone goes straight to voicemail. At the party Channon and Chris never attended, friends are comparing notes. Nobody heard from them after Saturday evening. Text messages are going unanswered. Calls are met with silence. By Sunday afternoon, panic has set in. The families contact Knoxville police, desperate for help. The response they receive will haunt them forever. Officers suggest that maybe the young couple just decided to spend the weekend together. Maybe they went out of town. Maybe they're just being irresponsible college kids. Wait 24 hours, the families are told. Then file a missing persons report. 24 hours. While Channon Christian was dying in a garbage can 3 miles away. Frustrated and terrified, the families take matters into their own hands. They organize their own search parties. They make their own flyers. They contact Channon's cell phone provider themselves, demanding to know the last location her phone had pinged. The answer leads them to a cell tower on Cherry Street in North Knoxville. Late Sunday night into early Monday morning, January 8th. Family and friends comb the Cherry Street area. They're looking for any sign of Channon's distinctive Toyota 4Runner. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on January 8th, they find it. The 4Runner is parked at the intersection of Chipman Street and Glider Avenue, less than 2 blocks from Davidson's house. But Channon and Chris are nowhere to be found. The vehicle immediately tells a story of violence. The front seats have been pushed all the way back. Channon, at 5'2", could never have reached the pedals from that position. The floorboards are covered in mud, completely inconsistent with how meticulous Channon was about her car. More disturbing, stickers that Channon kept on her windows have been peeled off. Personal items she always kept in the car, a teddy bear, photographs, her phone charger, are missing. But investigators find something that doesn't belong. A pack of Newport cigarettes on the dashboard. Neither Channon nor Chris smoked, and neither of them smoked Newports. It's the first concrete clue that someone else had been in Channon's car. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source, an envelope found inside the 4Runner. Investigators process the envelope for fingerprints and get a hit in the system. The print belongs to Lemaricus Davidson, a known felon with an address at 2316 Chipman Street, just 2 blocks from where the abandoned SUV was found. On January 9, 2007, police obtain a search warrant for Davidson's house. When officers arrive at 2316 Chipman Street, they find the house empty. Davidson and his associates have fled. But the evidence they left behind tells a horrifying story. In the kitchen, investigators make the discovery that will haunt them for the rest of their careers. Channon Christian's body, stuffed inside a residential garbage can, wrapped in multiple trash bags. The DNA evidence collected from the scene is overwhelming. Davidson's sperm is found in Channon's body. His fingerprints are on the garbage bags that contained her remains. Cobbins' DNA is also recovered from the victim. Items belonging to both Channon and Chris are scattered throughout the house. her purse, her camera with photographs that had been ripped and burned, his baseball caps, his driver's license. The killers had kept trophies of their crimes. Shell casings found in Davidson's house matched the bullets that killed Christopher Newsom at the railroad tracks. Ballistics evidence creates an undeniable link between the house and both crime scenes. But Davidson and his accomplices are gone. A massive manhunt begins. Police issue bolos for all 5 suspects. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation joins the search. The FBI offers assistance. The break comes on January 11th, when police trace phone calls between Davidson and Eric Boyd. Boyd, under pressure, agrees to lead investigators to Davidson's hiding place, a vacant house on Reynolds Street. When police storm the location, they find Davidson along with Christopher Newsom's size 9.5 Nike Shox shoes and a .22 caliber revolver, the murder weapon. Over the next several days, the remaining suspects fall like dominoes. Thomas, Cobbins, and Coleman are arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky. Police seize a computer showing the suspects had been monitoring news coverage of the murders. They also recover Channon's overnight bag and other personal belongings. 5 arrests, 5 killers who thought they had committed the perfect crime. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the determination of 2 families who refused to let their children be forgotten, and investigators who wouldn't rest until justice was served. The case that would define Knoxville for the next decade was just beginning. The trials began in 2008. For the Christian and Newsom families, this meant reliving their worst nightmare in excruciating detail as prosecutors laid out the evidence against each killer. Eric Boyd was the first to face trial, but only in federal court for being an accessory after the fact. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The families knew this wasn't enough. Boyd had helped cover up the murders, but they believed he'd done far more than that.
There is some DNA that is consistent with Miss Christian's DNA. Would that be consistent with a cut hand that is bleeding, touching the back of her pants in that area and leaving blood?
It could be.
If her hands were tied, would that also be consistent?
Sure.
And also, inside in the interior of the jeans, Ms. Millsaps found DNA that is consistent with Mr. Davidson in the crotch area. Would that be consistent, again, with Mr. Davidson's sperm being inside Ms. Christian in her vaginal area or her anal area, and then putting the pants back on after Mr. Davidson deposited semen in her vagina and her anus?
Yes.
Thank you. And again, Dr. Malusnik, if Jennifer Millsaps with TBI has testified that the inside of the camisole, underneath the breast portion, in between the breasts, and this spot on the sweater right in here, tested positive for Letalvis Cobbins DNA, and this spot here on the inner left thigh tested positive for Letalvis Cobbins DNA. Would that be consistent with Ms. Christian in a seated position with sperm in her mouth, spitting it out, it getting into the inside of her bra, inside the camisole, settling in the bra portion of the camisole, and getting on the front of her sweater and the inner left thigh?
It's consistent. It could be one of the ways, yes.
Let's put these back.
The photos from the autopsy were played out on a large movie-sized screen, almost play-by-play. Every, as each layer of binding is removed and as each trash bag is removed, there's a new photo and close-up shots, and they're very graphic, and they were so graphic, in fact, that a new prosecutor who's assisting in this case grew faint early on into the autopsy presentation of Channon Christian's death.
And at 23:16.
Down.
We have a doctor in that.
And so we had to take a break in order to help her to recover. She did not return to the courtroom, however.
In August 2009, Letalvis Cobbins faced a Knox County jury. After hearing the horrific evidence, they sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, it was Lemaricus Davidson's turn, the ringleader who had orchestrated this nightmare. The jury didn't hesitate. Davidson was sentenced to death. George Thomas received life without parole. Vanessa Coleman, the youngest of the group at just 18, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. By 2010, it seemed over. The families could finally heal. Then everything collapsed. Judge Richard Baumgartner, who had presided over all 4 state trials, was living a shocking double life. In March 2011, he was forced to resign after admitting to years of drug addiction. The details were staggering. Baumgartner had been buying prescription pills from convicted felons, trading legal favors for sex. He had been impaired while overseeing the most important murder trials in Knox County history. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation determined his ability to conduct trials had been severely compromised. In September 2011, he was disbarred. Every conviction he'd overseen was now in question. On December 1, 2011, all 4 defendants were granted new trials. The families who had endured years of testimony would have to go through it all again. The retrials began in 2012. Coleman was reconvicted with a reduced sentence of 35 years. Thomas was again found guilty. The Tennessee Supreme Court ultimately upheld Davidson and Cobbinson's original convictions, but Eric Boyd still hadn't faced state murder charges. Hugh and Mary Newsom refused to give up. "I just had a gut feeling Eric Boyd was the one who killed him," Mary said, "and I wasn't going to let Eric get away with it." They attended every hearing, every appeal, working tirelessly with prosecutors and investigators. Meanwhile, Gary Christian was fighting his own battle. The trials had consumed him with rage that was destroying his life. But in 2017, he found faith and began speaking at churches about overcoming the anger that had dominated him for a decade. The breakthrough came in 2018. 11 years after the murders, a Knox County grand jury finally indicted Eric Boyd on 36 counts, including first-degree murder. Boyd's trial began in August 2019. George Thomas testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting his role and identifying Boyd as Christopher Newsom's killer. On August 13, 2019, 12 years, 7 months, and 7 days after the murders, Eric Boyd was found guilty on nearly all charges. Judge Bob McGee sentenced him to life without parole plus 90 years. Finally, all 5 killers were behind bars for life. Justice had been served, but at an enormous cost. 12 years of legal battles, millions in taxpayer dollars, countless hours forcing families to relive their worst memories, and 2 young people remain dead, their futures stolen forever. From unimaginable tragedy came meaningful change. The Christian Newsom case exposed critical flaws in Tennessee's legal system that demanded reform. In June 2014, Governor Bill Haslam signed 2 landmark laws named after the victims. The Chris Newsom Act eliminated the 13th juror rule, the requirement that a judge must validate a jury's unanimous verdict. This archaic rule had allowed Judge Baumgartner's corruption to invalidate the original convictions, forcing families through years of additional trials. Under Chris's law, once a jury delivers a unanimous verdict, it stands. The Channon Christian Act protects victims from character assassination in court. Defense attorneys can no longer make irrelevant allegations against victims unless directly related to the case. These laws ensure that what happened to these families, the legal manipulation, the endless retrials, can never happen again. The house at 2316 Chipman Street was demolished in 2008. In its place stands a memorial where Channon and Chris are remembered with dignity. The Channon Gale Christian Foundation provides scholarships for University of Tennessee students through an annual golf tournament celebrating her love of the sport. The Chris Newsom Memorial Foundation holds a yearly baseball tournament at Hall's Community Park. Over the years, it has provided 42 scholarships to Hall's high school students. Mary Newsom says she sees cardinals and butterflies everywhere, signs she believes that Chris is still with them. 18 years later, two young people who had their futures stolen have become guardians of justice for others. Their names now protect victims across Tennessee. Their memories fund dreams for students who might otherwise never get the chance. Channon wanted to help underserved communities. In death, her foundation continues that mission. Chris took pride in building things that would last. His memorial foundation builds futures that endure for generations. Evil tried to erase them. Instead, their legacy grows stronger every year. January 6, 2007. That date will forever mark one of the darkest chapters in Knoxville's history. 18 years later, Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom's names are spoken not just as victims, but as forces for change. Laws protect other victims because of them. Students receive scholarships in their memory. Their killers will never walk free again. The families will never stop grieving. The pain remains, but they've transformed unimaginable loss into something powerful, a legacy that grows stronger every year. In the end, that's what endures, not the evil that tried to destroy them, but the light that continues to shine in their memory. Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Their names deserve to be remembered. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.